The marble hallway of the Capitol shimmered under harsh camera lights, a living artery of American power suddenly pulsing faster. Reporters jostled for position, microphones raised like a forest of questions. Phones chimed with breaking alerts while monitors overhead blazed the headline every outlet now shared. Congress in uproar after fiery exchange. Staffers whispered, eyes wide, as if a political earthquake had just rolled beneath their feet. Outside, the late afternoon sky burned copper, but inside the air was electric and cold. Viewers across the country leaned closer to their screens, sensing history's spark. A voice, steady and low, began to narrate the moment. It started with one searing sentence that lit up the White House and the halls of Congress. That sentence belonged to Representative Jasmine Crockett, a woman whose calm clarity had long unsettled those who thrived on chaos. She had spoken not with the roar of partisanship, but with the precision of someone who knew truth didn't need to shout. Her words questioned the moral health of a movement, and, in doing so, touched the rawest nerve of a nation already on edge. Within minutes, the West Wing responded. Karoline Leavitt, the administration's fiery press secretary, stepped behind the podium, eyes flashing with defiance. Cameras caught every sharp syllable as she framed Crockett's remark as an insult to millions. The clash traveled at the speed of a tweet, lighting up timelines from El Paso to Philadelphia. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Commentators called it a showdown of conviction versus outrage. Back in the corridor, the crowd thickened. Lawmakers peeked from office doors, sensing that what had begun as a single quote was fast becoming a defining confrontation. The hum of speculation swelled. Who would yield? Who would double down? And how far would this fight reach? The narrator's voice lowered, carrying a promise and a warning. One measured reply had already shaken the political hive, but the counterstrike that followed, delivered with an icy calm no one saw coming, would leave even the most seasoned power brokers speechless. The cameras kept rolling, the nation held its breath, and the next move belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Across the country, the political landscape already felt like dry tinder waiting for a spark. Years of Trump-era rallies, court battles, and social media crossfire had left Americans divided not just by party, but by worldview. Families skipped holiday dinners to avoid shouting matches. Friendships thinned under the weight of conspiracy theories and election disputes. A single comment could ignite weeks of outrage, and everyone knew it. Into that volatile atmosphere came Representative Jasmine Crockett's measured but cutting observation that the nation faced a mental health crisis among those still devoted to Donald Trump. She said it during a televised panel, voice calm and deliberate, as if diagnosing a patient. Yet the phrasing sliced through cable news chatter like a scalpel. Supporters of the former president heard more than concern. They heard an accusation that their loyalty was sickness itself. Within minutes, hashtags bloomed across social platforms. Hashtag Crockett insults millions. Hashtag truth or trash. Each side rallying with digital banners held high. Progressive viewers replayed the clip with a sense of vindication. To them, Crockett had finally spoken aloud what polite politics avoided. That relentless disinformation was warping the national psyche. Conservative commentators, meanwhile, went on offense. Talk radio hosts called the remark elitist arrogance. Influencers urged followers to flood congressional phone lines. The country's old wounds were reopened with surgical precision, and the sting was immediate. At the White House, Karoline Leavitt saw her moment. Only 20-something, yet already a veteran of political combat, the press secretary moved with the speed of someone born to the news cycle. Within hours, she strode to the podium, a storm of camera flashes greeting her. Her tone was crisp, her eyes locked on the press corps. She declared that Crockett's words were an insult to more than 80 million Americans, a smear against hard-working families who believed in the former president. They are patriots, she said, her voice sharpening. To suggest otherwise is beneath the dignity of Congress. Her defense of those voters wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a rallying cry. Right-leaning media clipped her soundbite for instant playback. Supporters flooded comment sections with gratitude and fire emojis. To them, Leavitt embodied defiance, the young fighter willing to shield their community from what they saw as sneering disdain. Meanwhile, on progressive feeds, the reaction was equally fierce but inverted. "Notice how fast they mobilize," one commentator tweeted, applauding Crockett for refusing to soften her language. Editorials framed the moment as a test of moral clarity. Was it cruel to call out the mental strain of mass disinformation, or cowardly not to? By late afternoon, the Capitol vibrated with anticipation. Lawmakers who had planned routine committee hearings found themselves cornered by reporters asking for instant takes. Was Crockett right? Was Leavitt grandstanding? Each quote became fuel for the digital blaze. Cable networks broke into regular programming with side-by-side footage of the two women, looping their statements like dueling drumbeats. Yet beneath the noise lay something deeper, a question about the very health of American democracy. Could a nation built on free expression withstand such raw division without tearing itself apart? Viewers sensed the stakes, but couldn't look away. This wasn't just another partisan scuffle. It was a mirror held up to the country's soul. And as the day unfolded, whispers grew louder that Representative Crockett would respond again, this time directly, unmistakably. Allies urged restraint. Critics braced for escalation. The nation waited. Before the sun set over Washington, both Jasmine Crockett and Karoline Leavitt would become household names, their clash defining more than a news cycle. It would mark a turning point in the story of a country struggling to decide whether truth and dignity could still command the room. Karoline Leavitt's ascent in Washington politics felt almost cinematic, a meteoric rise fueled by relentless ambition and a talent for commanding the spotlight. Barely into her late 20s, she had already leapt from small-town New Hampshire roots to the most visible podium in American politics, the White House press briefing room. Colleagues described her as a natural combatant, a communicator who could parry a reporter's question with the speed of a fencer and the precision of a trial lawyer. For supporters, she was the embodiment of a new conservative generation, media-savvy, sharp-tongued, and unafraid to spar. For critics, she was a storm in a tailored suit, a messenger who treated every inquiry as a personal challenge. Leavitt's story began far from the marble halls of Washington. Growing up in a working-class family in Dover, she had an instinct for debate from an early age. Teachers recalled the teenager who would stay after class to challenge assumptions, never intimidated by authority. She studied journalism at St. Anselm College, where she sharpened her rhetorical edge on campus panels and local radio. By graduation, she had already interned on Capitol Hill and secured a communications post with a prominent Republican lawmaker. The pace never slowed. When Donald Trump's re-election campaign came calling, she answered, cutting her teeth as a rapid response spokeswoman during one of the most turbulent political periods in modern memory. It was there she learned the art of the counterpunch. Reporters who expected a polite 20-something found instead a spokesperson who quoted polling crosstabs from memory and fired back with biting humor. The campaign's senior staff noticed. By the time the new administration took shape, Leavitt's reputation for quick retorts and unflinching loyalty made her an obvious choice for the West Wing. At the White House podium, she transformed briefings into verbal battlegrounds. Where previous press secretaries often played diplomat, Leavitt wielded her microphone like a sword. Exchanges that might have ended with a neutral, "I'll get back to you," instead became headline fodder. She sparred with veteran correspondents over immigration statistics, scolded fact-checkers who challenged the president's economic claims, and once famously ended a heated session by walking out mid-question, leaving cameras rolling on an empty lectern. Supporters cheered her brazenness. Finally, someone who doesn't let the media bully conservatives, talk radio hosts crowed. Detractors, however, warned that her confrontational style eroded the already fragile relationship between the press and the executive branch. Controversy shadowed her every move. When a hurricane devastated the Gulf Coast, Leavitt clashed with a regional journalist who accused the administration of delaying federal aid. Her curt dismissal, "Check your facts before you check your outrage," dominated news cycles for days. Months later, she faced criticism for defending a questionable social media post from a senior advisor, doubling down in the briefing room with the now infamous line, "We don't apologize for telling the truth that others are too timid to face." To her admirers, these were moments of courage. To her opponents, they were proof she prioritized spectacle over substance. Yet even her critics admitted she was effective. Cable networks scheduled programming around her appearances. Clips of her sharpest exchanges racked up millions of views within hours. She cultivated an online following that treated her like a cultural warrior, not merely a government spokesperson. In a political era where attention was currency, Karoline Leavitt was rich indeed. But with notoriety came isolation. Former colleagues whispered about the pressure cooker she created inside the press office, a place where loyalty was prized above collaboration, where young aides burned out after months of 12-hour days. Some journalists quietly refused one-on-one meetings with her, wary of being turned into viral fodder. Still, she thrived. Confrontation was not a burden for Leavitt, it was proof of relevance. When Representative Jasmine Crockett's comment about a mental health crisis among Trump supporters detonated across the airwaves, Leavitt recognized both a threat and an opportunity. Here was a chance to defend the millions who still adored the former president, to showcase her pugnacious loyalty before the largest possible audience. In less than an hour, she had a statement drafted, and by the next scheduled briefing, she was standing at the podium, posture straight, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Cameras clicked like distant thunder as she began to speak. Her opening words dripped with controlled indignation. She accused Crockett of slandering patriotic Americans and stigmatizing honest voters. The phrasing was surgical, designed to inflame supporters and bait detractors. Social media lit up. Conservative commentators hailed her as fearless. Progressives called her remarks proof of a culture war waged from the White House itself. For Karoline Leavitt, it was familiar terrain. Another day, another fight, another clip destined for viral replay. But what she didn't yet realize, what no one in that packed briefing room could know, was that this confrontation would not unfold like the others, because this time her trademark aggression was about to meet an immovable force. Long before Jasmine Crockett strode through the marble corridors of Congress, she learned what it meant to hold her ground. She was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, a city where wealth and poverty often shared the same block, where the promise of opportunity coexisted with the weight of discrimination. Her parents, both public school educators, taught her that a strong mind and a steady heart were the best armor against injustice. Dinner conversations in the Crockett household swirled with talk of lesson plans and civil rights history, shaping a young girl who understood that words and knowledge could move mountains. As a teenager, Jasmine felt the dual pull of ambition and responsibility. She excelled in debate club, thriving on the challenge of crafting arguments so airtight they left opponents scrambling. Yet she also worked part-time jobs to help with family expenses, filing papers in a local clinic and volunteering at a community center where she witnessed neighbors struggle with housing discrimination and predatory lending. Those early encounters etched a permanent truth. Laws were only as just as the people enforcing them. College took her to the University of Houston, where she majored in political science and absorbed the city's vibrant diversity. Friends remember her as both the life of the study group and the one who stayed late to help first-generation classmates navigate financial aid forms. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, never needing to shout to command attention. Law school followed, and there she found her calling in civil rights litigation. While classmates angled for corporate internships, Jasmine sought out cases that others deemed too messy or too small. She defended tenants evicted without cause, fought for voting access in underfunded districts, and stood beside families facing police misconduct. Every victory was hard-won, every setback a lesson in resilience. Her work demanded sacrifice. Long nights at the office replaced social gatherings, student loan bills stacked up as she chose clients who could barely pay.
But she stayed the course, convinced that justice required more than comfort. It required persistence. Those who opposed her often underestimated her because of her soft-spoken demeanor. They learned quickly that calm did not mean weak. In court, her arguments were a masterclass in precision. Judges noted her meticulous preparation, her ability to disarm hostility with facts. "She brings light, not heat," one mentor said, admiring the way she turned data and precedent into unassailable narratives. That reputation carried her into the Texas legislature, where she championed voting rights, police reform, and equitable education funding. It also introduced her to the brutal realities of modern politics: relentless misinformation campaigns, coordinated attacks on social media, and colleagues who mistook compromise for surrender. Yet Jasmine navigated the noise with the same deliberate grace she'd honed in the courtroom. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, each word landed with the weight of preparation. By the time she ran for Congress, she had already weathered storms that would have derailed many careers. Opponents questioned her credibility, dredged up out-of-context quotes, and tried to paint her advocacy as radical. Instead of trading insults, she doubled down on transparency, inviting journalists to town halls and publishing detailed policy papers online. Her social media presence became an extension of her calm strategy: live Q&A sessions, data-driven threads, and short videos that explained complex policy with clarity and a touch of humor. Young voters especially took notice, sharing her posts across platforms until her name became synonymous with thoughtful leadership. Behind the polished public image, sacrifices continued. Friends recall late-night phone calls where Jasmine confessed the loneliness of the job, the missed family birthdays, the strain of constant travel, the weight of constituents' expectations. Still, she pressed forward, sustained by a belief that every bill she championed, every speech she delivered, moved the country a fraction closer to fairness. "If we don't keep pushing," she once told a group of law students, "the door to justice closes on someone else." Her composure became her signature. When hearings grew tense, when cameras sought a soundbite of outrage, she offered reason instead of rage. Journalists began to describe her as the still point in a spinning room, a lawmaker whose steadiness exposed the theatrics of those around her. Supporters saw in her a reflection of their own hopes, that dignity could still triumph over bluster, that truth could travel further than a viral insult. It was this hard-earned equilibrium that set the stage for her confrontation with Karoline Leavitt. When Crockett observed that America faced a mental health crisis among those still enthralled by Donald Trump, she spoke not as a provocateur, but as someone who had spent years diagnosing the deeper illnesses of inequality and disinformation. She knew the words would sting, but she believed candor was the first step toward healing. And when the White House press secretary shot back with accusations of elitism and disrespect, her supporters recognized a familiar pattern: the attempt to drown careful analysis in a flood of outrage. Yet, Jasmine remained unmoved. She prepared her next steps with the same precision she had once brought to court filings and floor debates. Advisors urged caution, allies suggested softening the rhetoric. But she understood the stakes were larger than a single news cycle. The question was not whether she would respond, but how and when. Every chapter of her life, from the Dallas classrooms where she first debated fairness to the late-night legal battles fought for clients without a voice, had forged a quiet strength. Her upbringing taught her compassion. Her legal career taught her strategy. Congress had taught her patience. Now, all those lessons converged, because the moment was coming when Jasmine Crockett would have to stand, live and unscripted, against one of the sharpest tongues in national politics. All of it would prepare her for the confrontation that tested every ounce of that composure.
Morning broke over Washington with the restless hum of anticipation. Overnight, cable networks had played Karoline Leavitt's blistering press briefing on a loop, her words sharpened into sound bites that cut through every channel's chyron. She had stood at the White House podium like a fencer, accusing Representative Jasmine Crockett of smearing millions of honest Americans, warning that such rhetoric insults the very core of our democracy. The phrasing was careful, but charged, and by dawn it had already stirred a political storm. Reporters flooded the Capitol steps, microphones ready for the next volley. Members of Congress filed past in tailored suits, each one ambushed for comment. Some Republicans applauded Leavitt's defense of the people, claiming Crockett had crossed an unforgivable line. A handful of Democrats urged restraint, calling the clash a distraction from governing, while others quietly admitted admiration for Crockett's candor. Hallway conversations became whispered strategy sessions. Was this the moment to confront the culture of disinformation head-on, or a trap that would swallow the day's agenda? Inside her office, Jasmine Crockett watched the press conference replay with a steady gaze. Her staff hovered, phones buzzing with requests for interviews and statements. Advisors debated whether to respond at all. "You don't need to dignify it," one urged. But Jasmine understood the stakes. Silence would be read as retreat, and retreat was never her language. She spoke softly, a single sentence that stilled the room. "We answer with facts." By early afternoon, she appeared on a national news program, a backdrop of the Capitol dome behind her. The host wasted no time. "Representative Crockett, the White House says you've slandered millions of voters. Do you regret your comment?" Cameras zoomed tight on her face, searching for a flicker of doubt. None appeared. "What I said," she replied, voice calm but resonant, "is that disinformation and political addiction are real public health concerns. That's not an insult. It's a call to healing. When people are fed lies day after day, it harms minds and divides families. We all deserve better." Her words flowed like a carefully composed brief, each phrase deliberate, each pause weighted. She never raised her tone, but the force of her argument made the studio feel suddenly charged. Back at the White House, Leavitt caught the segment on a muted screen. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the interviewer pressed for clarification. Crockett continued, "I respect every voter's humanity. What I refuse to respect is the machinery of deception that preys on them, and I will not apologize for naming it." Social media lit up before the interview even ended. Progressive accounts hailed the Congresswoman's poise. Conservative influencers accused her of backpedaling in lawyerly language. But the clip traveled faster than their critiques, shared millions of times within the hour. Meanwhile, the Capitol buzzed like a hive. In committee rooms, senators passed notes instead of questions. Staffers whispered updates from their phones. The usual rhythms of government, hearings, markups, quiet negotiations, stalled as everyone waited for the next move. Even those who disagreed with Crockett privately acknowledged her discipline. "She's not playing their game," one Republican aide muttered, half impressed, half wary. By late afternoon, the standoff had become the only story in town. Commentators framed it as a generational duel, a fiery press secretary known for rapid counterpunches versus a congresswoman whose silence could slice sharper than a shout. Networks cut between White House press room footage and Crockett's calm television appearance, as if editing a live split-screen debate. But beneath the spectacle, something deeper simmered. Viewers sensed that this was no ordinary partisan quarrel. It was a collision of two visions of public life, one built on perpetual outrage, the other on quiet conviction. The question hanging over Washington was not merely who would win, but whether dignity could still command the room. As dusk settled over the city, the halls of Congress grew expectant and still. Staffers leaned against door frames, eyes on glowing screens, waiting for the next flash of headlines. Everyone knew a decisive moment was coming. Jasmine Crockett had delivered her measured defense, but the nation could feel she wasn't finished. Her supporters sensed it in her steady cadence. Her critics braced for it in wary silence. The narrator's voice would later describe it best. The day had begun with a single insult and spiraled into a national reckoning. But the reply that came next, the move no one, least of all Karoline Leavitt, saw coming, would redefine the confrontation and leave the Capitol breathless. The chamber felt unnaturally still. as though the marble columns themselves were holding their breath. Cameras crowded the back wall, their tiny red lights blinking like a constellation of restless eyes. Every seat was filled, staffers lining the edges, reporters clutching their devices. Karoline Leavitt stood near the witness table, chin lifted, a faint smile flickering, the same smile she'd worn in 100 sparring matches with the press. She expected another round of predictable pushback, something she could swat away with a clever retort. Then Representative Jasmine Crockett stepped forward. She didn't rush, she didn't raise her voice. Her heels clicked once, twice, 3 times against the polished floor as she crossed to the microphone, and somehow that simple rhythm cut through the buzz of whispered speculation. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the photographers paused, lenses frozen in mid-focus. When she began, her tone was so steady it felt almost intimate. "I'm not here to insult anyone," she said, each word enunciated with a lawyer's precision. "I am here to tell the truth, and to ask whether our democracy can survive if we refuse to face it." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. She didn't glance toward Leavitt, but the weight of her words landed squarely in that direction. Crockett continued, weaving facts and quiet conviction into a tapestry of undeniable logic. "We have watched entire communities swallowed by disinformation," she said. "Neighbors who once shared meals now won't share a sidewalk. Parents no longer speak to their children because of viral lies. That is not strength. That is a public health crisis of the mind and of the spirit." Her cadence quickened just enough to lift the energy without breaking her calm. "And when leaders exploit that crisis for power," she added, "they are not defending voters, they are harming them." A collective inhale swept the chamber. The camera zoomed closer. Somewhere in the press gallery, a pen scratched furiously across paper. Crockett shifted her stance, the faintest movement, and looked out over the rows of lawmakers. "Every American, Republican, Democrat, or Independent, deserves the dignity of truth," she said. "We owe our people honesty, not addiction to outrage. We owe them facts, not fantasies." The silence grew so deep that the click of a single camera shutter sounded like a firecracker. Karoline Leavitt's smile faltered. She straightened her jacket, eyes darted briefly toward the exits as if calculating the distance. Crockett did not let up. "This is not about left or right," she continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who has argued in courtrooms and community halls alike. "It is about whether we will allow manipulation to masquerade as patriotism. It is about whether we can care enough for one another to say, 'The lies stop here.'" Reporters exchanged quick, startled glances. Tweets fired into the digital void before her next sentence left her lips. "And to those who claim I have insulted millions," she said, her eyes sweeping the room for the first time, "I say this: I see every citizen as worthy of respect. But I will never respect the machinery of deceit that profits from keeping you angry, frightened, and divided." A low murmur swelled, then faded, like a distant tide. Karoline Leavitt inhaled sharply, preparing to respond, but Crockett wasn't finished. "Public service demands more than applause lines," she said, her tone firm but almost mournful. "It demands courage, the courage to admit when the truth is hard, and the humility to stop feeding people poison just because it keeps the clicks coming. If that sounds radical, then we have fallen further than we realize." The words landed like stone after stone, building an unassailable wall. On the back benches, a conservative congressman, who moments earlier had smirked into his phone, now stared forward, expression unreadable.
A progressive staffer covered her mouth, eyes bright with something between awe and relief. Crockett took a single step closer to the microphone, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who has argued in courtrooms and community halls alike. "I will always stand for the dignity of every American," she said. "And that means I will always stand against those who trade your well-being for their own ambition, no matter how loud they shout, no matter how slick the slogan." Then she paused, just long enough for the silence to sharpen. In that breathless moment, the chamber seemed suspended in amber. Reporters forgot to type. Photographers lowered their cameras. Even the air conditioning's hum felt distant. Finally, she closed with a single sentence that would replay on every screen before midnight. "Truth is not partisan," she said, "but the courage to speak it will always be a test of character." The hush that followed was seismic. It wasn't merely the absence of noise, it was the presence of recognition, the sound of an argument so clear that even those who opposed it felt its weight. Karoline Leavitt blinked hard. The confidence that had fueled her morning briefing slipped like sand through an open palm. Her practiced lines of attack suddenly seemed small, almost brittle against the immovable calm across the room. A lone camera flash sparked the moment back to life, and then the chamber erupted. Journalists scrambled for the exits, phones pressed to ears, desperate to file stories before competitors. Social feeds exploded, hashtags blazing, clips looping, captions screaming. Within minutes, hashtag Crockett mic drop surged to the top of national trends. Commentators from across the political spectrum, liberal anchors, conservative contrarians, even apolitical celebrities began quoting her final line. Karoline Leavitt tried to summon a retort, but the din of reporters drowned her out. Microphones swung toward Crockett, who simply stepped back, offering no victory gesture, no triumphant smile, only that same steady composure. The sound of her measured footsteps echoed like a closing argument as she exited the chamber. Outside, the evening sky burned with streaks of orange and violet, the city's monuments cast in long shadows. A crowd had gathered on the steps, phones raised to catch a glimpse of the woman whose calm dismantling of a political opponent had just ricocheted across the nation. Some cheered softly, others merely watched, stunned. Inside, Karoline remained momentarily frozen. For the first time in her rapid-fire career, the press corps wasn't waiting for her rebuttal. They were already chasing a new story, the one she had inadvertently helped create. Long after Crockett left the building, the chamber buzzed with the echo of her words. Lawmakers from both parties replayed the exchange in their minds, recognizing that something more than a partisan clash had occurred. It felt like a shift, a reminder that substance could still eclipse spectacle, that quiet conviction could still command the room. And as the city's lights blinked awake, the aftershocks began to spread far beyond those marble walls. In living rooms across the country, families watched the viral clip and felt a flicker of something rare, the possibility that dignity might yet have the final word. But this was only the beginning. The resonance of that mic drop moment would travel farther and faster than anyone imagined, reshaping conversations not just in Washington, but in kitchens, cafes, and classrooms nationwide. The question was no longer whether Jasmine Crockett had won the day. It was how far the tremors of her quiet thunder would reach, and what would happen when the next morning's headlines carried her challenge to every corner of America. The aftershocks, as one late-night anchor would soon observe, were only starting to register.
Night fell over Washington with the fever of a breaking storm.
Before the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's final sentence had even faded from the chamber, the digital world had already ignited. On Twitter, now rechristened X, hashtags flared like sudden fireworks. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag pressroom showdown, hashtag truth over spin. Within an hour, they were climbing past celebrity gossip and playoff scores to dominate the national feed. Clips of the exchange spread at lightning speed. One 30-second montage of Crockett's closing line, "Truth is not partisan, but the courage to speak it will always be a test of character," hit 1 million views before the evening news aired. Another edit layered her words over a slow drumbeat, the caption reading, "When calm destroys chaos." TikTok teens lip-synced the moment. Instagram Reels replayed her poised stance in endless loops. Cable producers raced to keep up. By 8 p.m., every major network led with the story. Panels of analysts debated whether this was a turning point in political discourse or simply a masterclass in messaging. Conservative commentators tried to downplay the impact, but even they conceded the performance was undeniably effective. Then came the celebrity course. A-list actors posted heart emojis and the phrase "Crockett energy." Late-night comedians built entire monologues around the mic drop, praising a takedown so smooth it should come with a jazz soundtrack. Pop stars quoted her final line on stage at concerts, their audiences roaring approval. Each endorsement amplified the moment, giving it a cultural reach far beyond C-SPAN. Meanwhile, pollsters scrambled to capture the shockwave. An overnight survey showed a measurable uptick in favorability ratings for Crockett, not just among Democrats, but among independents hungry for calm authenticity. Another poll found that a significant slice of moderate Republicans admired her clarity and composure, even if they disagreed with her politics. The numbers flashed across cable chyrons, fueling a fresh round of speculation. Could this single exchange elevate her from respected representative to national figure? Inside the White House press office, the mood was less celebratory. Staffers reviewed footage frame by frame, trying to script a counter-narrative. Karoline Leavitt, usually quick with a fiery comeback, remained conspicuously silent. Her allies offered perfunctory defenses, but reporters noticed the absence of her trademark bravado. "It's like the air went out of the balloon," one senior correspondent whispered between live shots. Back in Texas, Crockett's constituents gathered in living rooms and local cafes to watch reruns of The Clash. Community leaders beamed with pride. "She stood tall for all of us," a church elder said during a watch party. His words met with nods and applause. Immigrant families in particular saw themselves reflected in her dignity, the child of working-class parents refusing to be shouted down by power. Across the country, the confrontation became a shorthand for something bigger than politics. Editorials framed it as a lesson in civic courage, the idea that poise can be more devastating than anger, that truth calmly delivered can cut deeper than any insult. Teachers discussed it in civics classes the next morning. Corporate leaders cited it in meetings about crisis communication. The phrase "pulling a Crockett" began trending as slang for staying unflappably cool under fire. Even those outside the political bubble couldn't avoid the story. Screens in airports replayed the clip on loop. Coffee shop chatter revolved around that congresswoman who owned the press room. Uber drivers and hairstylists debated whether this signaled a new era of straight-talk politics. The moment had become a national reference point, crossing the rare threshold from headline to cultural touchstone. Yet amid the celebration, a deeper current of reflection emerged. Commentators noted that Crockett hadn't simply scored a partisan win, she had modeled a different kind of power, one rooted in composure, empathy, and unshakable fact. One columnist wrote, "She didn't just silence an opponent, she reminded us that the loudest voice isn't always the strongest." As midnight approached, the city's monuments glowed under a silver moon, but the conversation refused to dim. Podcasts recorded emergency episodes. News alerts buzzed on millions of phones. The next morning's papers would feature Crockett's silhouette on their front pages, but even that felt like an understatement of the reach her words had found. And still, the truest impact was only beginning to surface. Beyond the trending hashtags and celebrity shoutouts, beyond the polls and punditry, ordinary people were left with a quiet takeaway. Dignity can disarm fury, and steadfast truth can echo louder than any shout. The narrative was no longer just about a viral moment or a single sparring match in the halls of power. It was about a nation suddenly reminded of what principled leadership looks like when the cameras are rolling and when they're not. But as commentators would soon say, the most enduring lesson wasn't about politics at all. It was about the timeless force of poise, the kind that turns a single evening in Congress into a cultural turning point and sends ripples of possibility across the country. The question now was how those ripples would shape the days ahead, because the story of that mic drop night was far from over.
The morning after the storm, Washington awoke to a quieter city, but not a city unchanged. Headlines blared Crockett's triumph, yet she greeted the new day without victory laps. Instead, she returned to her routine: a pre-dawn run along the Potomac, a quiet coffee, a meeting with constituents. For her, the point had never been a viral clip. It was, and remains, something larger. In interviews that followed, Crockett shifted the conversation away from personal praise and toward collective responsibility. "This isn't about me," she told one national morning show, voice gentle but firm. "It's about what we owe each other as Americans. We can't keep screaming across the divide and expect to heal. We need honesty, and we need care, for our democracy and for our own mental well-being."